In the 70 years history of Japanese ODA, educational development has always been a priority area, and Japan has implemented a variety of educational cooperation projects and programs. This book comprehensively documents the history of international education cooperation by the Japanese government, aid agencies, and NGOs from the 1950s to the present, analyzing the aims of Japanese educational assistance, the contribution it has made, and the challenges it has faced and overcome, providing implications for future cooperation. In this video, the three editors introduce the historical context of the book, evolution of Japanese educational cooperation policy, the history of Japan's project implementation, and Japan's role in the global governance of international education cooperation.
Historically, Japan's educational cooperation policies have been developed mainly by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MOFA, Ministry of Education, MAX, and then Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA. Especially in the 90s and 2000s, in the EFA and the MDGs era, these three governmental agencies collaboratively and sometimes competitively developed and announced various policy documents and statements to promote and direct Japanese educational cooperation. When the 1990 Jomtien Conference defined the achievement of EFA as a common goal of the international community, it pushed Japan to join the world trends for basic education, as Japan's educational cooperation mostly focused on vocational and higher education until 1980s. Immediately following the Jomtien Conference, JICA established an investigative commission on educational assistance in 1990, and then the Aid Study Committee on Development Education in 1992, and final reports of the both committees emphasized the importance of basic education and suggested Japan's ODA and JICA's operation to be more promoted in this subsector. Following the JICA's initiative, the Ministry of Education, MAX, organized conferences and experts committees on international education cooperation several times in the late 1990s and 2000s to build a domestic support system in this area. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as a leading ministry of ODA, took a lead to develop national-level official policies on Japan's educational cooperation collaborating with MAX. Its first distinct educational cooperation policy was the Basic Education for Growth Initiative, BEGIN, and it was announced by Prime Minister Koizumi at the G8 Kananaskis Summit in 2002. Later, in 2010, MOFA took a lead to develop Japan's educational cooperation policy 2011 to 2015, which was announced by Prime Minister Kan at the United Nations MDG Summit. And most recently, the ministry developed Learning Strategy for Peace and Growth in 2015, and it was announced by Prime Minister Abe at the UN SDG Summit. Following these policy initiatives, JICA has developed its position papers on educational cooperation. In this way, there are three policy spaces for development of Japan's educational cooperation policies, and the suggested directions by these policies were influenced by their institutional priorities, expected audiences and outcomes, and their roles for Japanese ODA. However, there were consistently appeared and shared prioritized targets in these policy documents also. They are the notions of educational cooperation for mutual understanding and peace, emphasis on self-help efforts and ownership of developing countries, and importance of quality of education, all of which are strongly influenced by Japan's its own historical experiences.
The history of Japan's project implementation in educational cooperation has been influenced by both domestic and international trends. From the 1950s to the 1980s, projects focused on development of Tibet and higher education based on the Japanese government's view that human resource development is the foundation for nation building and economic development. Thus, Japan put efforts into fostering leaders and experts in various fields, as well as mid-level technicians necessary for industrial development during this time. Later in the 1990s, in line with the global movement towards education for all, assistance for basic education rapidly expanded to include a variety of projects at primary and secondary education levels. Even today, basic education, Tibet, and higher education remain the three major subsectors of Japanese educational cooperation, and ODA projects are implemented through a combination of modalities including technical cooperation, grant aid, and loans. Educational cooperation by NGOs and through international organizations is also active. The three major subsectors of Japanese educational cooperation, basic education, Tibet, and higher education, each have their own unique histories and characteristics. Japan's cooperation in basic education has been characterized by a rapid expansion since the 1990s, with the bulk of assistance directed towards improving science and mathematics education and building schools. However, since the 2000s, programs have diversified to include support for vulnerable groups such as girls and children with disabilities. Tibet has been central to Japan's ODA since its early stages, and as human resource development, or hitozukuri, became a foundational concept in Japan's ODA philosophy, Tibet projects became increasingly focused. The training of field-oriented technicians and skilled workers for industrial development has been a core characteristic of Japan's Tibet cooperation. Two characteristics of cooperation in higher education can be noted. First, Japan's cooperation in higher education did not decline during the EFA era of the 1990s. The development needs of higher education in Asia, Japan's main cooperation partner, were great, and Japan continued its cooperation in higher education throughout the 1990s. Second, Japanese cooperation in higher education has focused on scholarships and development programs for individual higher education institutions, with little cooperation in higher education policy and system development.
Hello, I'm Yuto Kitamura, one of the editors of the book. I would like to discuss about Japan's role in global governance of international cooperation in education. In general, donor countries and international organizations provide education assistance to developing countries based on their own aid policies. At the same time, as symbolized by the Education for All goals, as well as the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, a certain direction has been set by the international community. A global governance framework has been established, and various actors are working together to provide aid in more aligned and consolidated manners. Within such global governance mechanisms, Japan's international education cooperation has maintained a degree of uniqueness as one of few non-Western donor countries with one of the highest levels of education in the world. Japan's official development assistance, which began as post-war compensation for Asian countries, has adopted a cautious approach to providing aid to developing countries, especially in the field of education. By maintaining such an attitude, Japan has built a relationship of trust with Asian countries and has provided education assistance based on requests from governments of developing countries and through mutual efforts of both sides. This approach has been generally well received by developing countries, both in Asia and outside Asia. In parallel with bilateral education assistance, Japan has recognized the importance of multilateral cooperation in education through partnerships with international organizations. Such partnerships have filled gaps in Japan's efforts to achieve its aid objectives with advantages such as political neutrality and expertise in performing a complementary role to Japan's own strengths. To be honest, we must admit that Japan has not always been very active in aid coordination. However, currently, Japan has been trying to mainstream its interests into the global agenda by collaborating with various partners. For instance, in recent years, we can observe Japan's increased efforts to play more proactive roles in international agenda setting by launching initiatives such as Education for Sustainable Development and by participating in discussions on the SDGs. Moreover, Japan has increased its funding to international organizations that support education in conflict-affected countries, thus aligning with global priorities. These efforts must be further built upon. Japan's international cooperation in the education sector needs to move forward to the next period of partnership with diverse stakeholders, including governments of developing countries, international organizations, and civil society organizations, by building on assets developed over the past 70 years. Thank you.
Finally, I will introduce the contents and features of the book. After an overview of the trajectory of Japan's international education cooperation in Chapter 1, the first part of the book provides a detailed description of Japan's educational cooperation policy before and after 1990. Part 2 describes basic education cooperation, including the construction of school buildings, improvement of teachers' classroom practices, and enhancement of administrative capacity and school management. Part 3 details the Tibet cooperation initiatives of JICA and the private sector. Chapter 4 discusses higher education, including university development and ODA scholarship programs. Part 5 focuses on projects and programs that play an important role in educational cooperation but are difficult to categorize into subsectors, including educational cooperation through international organizations, the role of NGOs, the use of ODA loans, and the work of Japan Overseas Cooperation Volunteers. Finally, Chapter 15 analyzes the driving forces shaping Japan's international education cooperation and the political implications of the analysis presented in the chapters. This book contributes to the academic literature on international education cooperation in the following 3 ways. First, it fosters understanding of the structure and the history of Japan's international education cooperation, consisting of basic education, Tibet, and higher education, and conducted by various entities. Second, it establishes current debates in Japanese educational cooperation by presenting empirical research results, utilizing policy documents, relevant literature, and project data. Third, it contextualizes these debates by presenting historical and analytical content in each chapter. This book will be of great value to those pursuing a deeper understanding of educational development and Japan's international cooperation in this field. Thank you very much.